X-Men. Get it!
Hey everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Battle of the Atom. This is your weekly X-Men podcast where we rank every story from A to Z, except for not this week, because this week we've got a guest. I'm Zack, by the way. You probably know this if you listen to this podcast, which I assume you have previously. Adam's not here this week. He has a cold, but instead we have a great guest for you. She is the assistant editor over on the X books right now. Previous work includes House of X, Powers of 10, X-Men, a bunch of stuff that's going on, including the upcoming 10 of Swords. It's Annalise Bissa. Annalise, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Besides having to do like 3 takes on your name, I am doing all right.
I answer to it. Nothing else really sounds like my name, so I generally know when people are talking to me, so no worries.
No, that's good. We're real excited to have you on. I know you've been a key but maybe under-recognized part of the X-Men, let's call it renaissance of the last year or so. And we definitely want to get your vibe on things. We want to get your feel for what's going on.
I appreciate that. I mean, I don't know that I'm under-recognized. I think I'm probably recognized just about enough, but it's great to be here, and I'm happy to be talking to you.
So let's start for people who may not know. What's your background with comics, with being an editor, and then how'd you get your start in Marvel? You've been there about 3 years now?
Yeah, it'll be 3 years in October, so
okay.
Getting there. So I have been a comics fan since I was a kid. I was an X-Men child, so I'm right where I'd like to be in terms of what I'm working on. But yeah, so I was an editorial intern at Marvel in college. And then after I did that a whole bunch, when I graduated, after a little while, I ended up, when there was a role open, interviewing for it. And I've been at Marvel, like you said, for about 3 years. Sort of the other thing, and then I've been working on X-Men for around 2 years. And then beyond that, the other thing that I do that people may or may not know is that I co-run the editorial intern program with Lauren Amaro. So I'm, molding the minds of tomorrow, as it were. But yeah, so that's another part of my job.
So assistant editor, that's a role that you said you get enough credit. I'd say that a lot of people, myself included, probably don't fully understand what that role is. So what's a little bit of your day-to-day like?
Sure. So assistant editor, I think part of the reason that people don't necessarily know what it entails is it can be a huge range of things. Assistant editors at any given time can be like having a pretty small impact on a book, dependent on, a million different factors, or, sometimes assistant editors are full editors on books and are just sort of supervised by their senior editor. So that's maybe part of the concern. But so assistant editors generally support a senior editor in running, a set of books or a line. So I work with Jordan D. White. And again, to be wildly generalizing here, he and I make sure that the books go to print on time. So I might be more on the side of, making sure that the record keeping is perfect on the book. So how many pages of every book do we have at any given time, right? That's information that kind of lives with me, so that I can report that accurately to Jordan and to the folks that get people paid and all of that. I generally am in charge of all things reference. So if somebody's costume is colored wrong in the X-Men books, for the most part, you can yell at me for it.
You
And
really want to invite that. You really want X-Men fans to yell at you because I know they will, is the thing.
listen, I know they will too. I've been working on the X-Men books for 2 years. It's fine. It's part of the job. I love it. But yeah, so I am basically on most of the emails Jordan's on, as far as I'm aware. And so, we'll get pages in, we'll both look at them. I have just as much right as anybody to say, hey, this script didn't really sit right with me, or I spotted this thing that maybe doesn't match up with something we've said previously, or, this is drawn in a way that I don't think, really tracks, or it's confusing to me as a reader. You know, if Jordan comes along and is like, that doesn't matter, that's going to overrule me. But, so I have both a lot of say and not a ton of say on the actual physical books. Pretty much just making sure that everything keeps running. I help out with schedules a lot and making sure that everybody knows when we're expecting their work to come in, making sure that everybody, has everything that they need in terms of, if a colorist needs inks, any of that kind of stuff, making sure that just everybody is where they need to be at all given times, and being another set of eyes on everything so that it's not just, just Jordan or just the writer or any of the artists looking at things.
No, that's interesting. I know one of the things that people tend to talk about comics, I think, as a a monolith of like one creator's run. Like in this case, and nothing against Jonathan Hickman, but everyone's been calling all of this stuff Hickman's X-Men, which he has that fancy head of X title and all that stuff. But I know there are tens and tens of people who are doing this every day as a big collaborative effort. And the way that it's always come across is that this is more collaborative than I think some other comics projects might be. Where you have not necessarily every book all connected, but there's a lot of through lines, a lot of connective tissue going into the X line right now. Is there any unique challenge that comes from trying to manage that on top of just the day to day of getting the books out?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you have everything as interconnected as it is right now, you have a higher percent chance of sort of screwing things up from one to another, which is great because it makes the stakes higher, which is good for us. But yeah, I mean, it's always collaborative, and I don't want to take anything away from anything else I've worked on by saying that this is more collaborative. It's just different in terms of the whole line sort of operating as a unit instead of books sort of playing in the same sandbox. Things tend to be more like directly touching, and they need to support one another. I'm not sure if that's a distinction that makes a lot of sense, but
it definitely makes sense to me, and I'm sure for the people who are listening, it'll make sense as well. Because these books have a lot going on. I know when I believe when Leah was on a couple of weeks ago, she was mentioning how just little things like when Betsy gives Rachel the little baby werewolf, uh, and Leah had chosen to name an X Factor. Teeny actually went back into the scripts and changed her last dialogue pass so that line, that amazing baby, was in there right at the start. And there's all those little nuggets in between that everyone's working on, from what I'm hearing.
yeah, so usually I think that's a situation where in most lines, editorial would be the ones working on every single book. So they would see those things and maybe say like, hey, actually, I see the opportunity for some fun connective tissue between this book and that book. With the way that the X line runs right now and the amount of insight into each other's projects that the writers have particularly, and the artists as well, they're just more aware of the book, any given book, from a earlier point in their like work cycle in the life of the book. And so you have more opportunities to say like, oh, you're going to be doing that thing in September. Well, I have a book in September that I'm working on, and wouldn't it be funny if we seeded this there? And so just from a standpoint of everybody being more connected, you get to have more of those fun moments.
No, that's good. It's a lot of exciting stuff that's happening in these, and definitely sounds like some challenges, especially when you're doing something pretty big. About a year ago, House of X Powers of 10 launched, which was I'd probably say like the biggest moment or event that I've seen since I've been reading comics. Now I'm biased being an X-Men guy, but it felt like everyone was reading it, everyone was there, and everyone was watching such a big paradigm shift happen in this line of books that would ripple out through a lot of different things. Were there any unique challenges editing a book or series of books like that was so much bigger than even just a line wide event comic or something like that?
Yeah, I think I've talked a little bit before, like elsewhere. I couldn't tell you where, about the way that the fact that we kept everything so secret leading up to it was both really exciting and I think helped people get super jazzed for the books. But also, that's really not necessarily somewhere that we're always comfortable being in terms of just giving people an understanding of the product that they're investing in, and what they're going to get from the book. When you just say like, trust us, it's going to be big, that's a certain amount of risk that you're asking your reader to take on. So that was kind of a crazy thing because everybody at Marvel knew we were doing something big and folks wanted to get the word out and to help us in publishing do the biggest thing possible, which generally would involve like a lot of like media push and giving previews here and there and telling people little teases about what will be in the book. And we were pretty darn locked down in
Oh,
terms
I
of
remember that.
yeah, right. I'm sure you recall it with such fondness. But like I know from my standpoint, I was terrified that I was going to send the wrong. There were like maybe 3 or 4 pages of color, like fully colored pages that we had released as previews, and we were, like I think one was Jean stepping through the gate on Krakoa next to like the huge waterfall.
Right.
Um, but I was so scared that I would have some kind of interaction with someone where I would include the wrong page and send something that we absolutely weren't going to reveal, and I was going to ruin the whole thing. So like that's a challenge that kind of doesn't exist anymore. Other than that, largely like in terms of workflow changes, just having data pages is something that didn't really exist in any of the books that I'd ever worked on. So that's been kind of interesting. And then from the standpoint of a new paradigm for the X-Men, like, there's literally a new language. And so people would say, like, hey, you know, can we have the Krakoan language files? Like, what is this? What does this mean? Or explaining to people a million times that, mutants can be resurrected now, and just getting to a point where enough people at Marvel and out in the world like understood what we were doing without spoiling it. And then even once the books were out there explaining like, okay, so the X-Men don't really look like they did in the movies, the X-Men don't look like they did in any of the TV shows or in any of the comics, prior to a couple months ago. Just kind of getting everybody onto that page was kind of nerve-wracking, but has been incredibly exciting. And, I have a million different reference folders of Krakoan infrastructure and what does it mean to draw something that looks Krakoan these days. So just, bringing people into that world has been difficult, but really rewarding and super fun.
No, that's exciting. I know there was a lot of hype being built for that, and definitely a lot of secrecy going through it. But I mean, in my mind, it paid off. And if I play armchair analyst here, the book kept getting reprints for those first couple of issues, and those last few for that kept selling. So something seems like it went right.
Yeah, I those were some fun Wednesdays when you'd come into the office and it'd be like, okay, how are people feeling? Or people would drop by the office when we started like passing out copies to people or sending copies to folks, within the Marvel bubble who weren't actually working on the books, and they
Right.
would come into the office and say like, "Hey, I read House of X #1. That comic's insane. This is like that's good. You guys have got something there." And it's like, okay, well, that's one more person who liked it. Okay, proof of concept. And then eventually, when the book came out, it was like, okay, this might be a good thing.
I mean, I think the vast majority of people would agree.
I hope so.
Now, one of the things that has come out of this is like you were talking, a bigger sense of community with the writers and artists and the creative teams on all these books. One of the things that has popped up a lot is, all of these X-Men summits or line-wide calls, either, pre-pandemic in person or during the whole COVID times over, a Zoom equivalent or what have you. So how do you wrangle that many people with that many ideas into one streamlined group in organization and actually accomplish anything?
Well, I mean, so I'm lucky because I would say largely a lot of that trouble falls to Jordan. So that's part of it is I don't have to, which is great. I think largely the answer is that it's just a great group of people who work really well together. And that everybody is excited to be where they are and wants to be working on the things that they're working on. You know, the writers are great, the artists are great, the color artists are great. In terms of, the X Slack or the X summits, that's, mostly the writer group. And everybody just is super engaged in it. And with it being a smaller group, you can have a little bit of a looser energy to it because you don't run the risk of like 40 people running around and, breaking off into like factions or whatever. It's just, okay, you've got this like pretty small group. Everybody's kind of on the same page about, what direction we're heading in. So it hasn't, I mean, in my experience, been inordinately difficult. Probably the hardest thing is just making sure that when somebody decides that they want to do something, we keep everyone in the loop. Everybody ratifies it, across books. Everybody, enjoys throwing ideas at each other, but making sure that, whoever had something thrown at them is comfortable incorporating that into their book or going down that road. And it's not just people sort of like complicating each other's lives for no reason. But I mean, like pretty much everything about editing comics, it's just a matter of communicating with people all the time and making sure that you're working with people who are going to communicate effectively back to you. I think that might be like kind of a cheesy answer, but it is unfortunately the truth.
Sometimes that's the most important thing. So you have this whole new world. You have this new Krakoan status quo that's going on that you've been involved with since pretty early on. What would you say is personally, as editor, fan, anything, your favorite new aspect of this wide world of X-Men that we now live in?
I think it's probably like the breadth of it, and how, as a fan and as an editor, I see so many options and opportunities, which I think is part of why it's had as good of a fan reaction as it has, is there are so many questions still to be explored about, what is Krakoa? What does it mean to be Krakoan? What does it mean to be a mutant right now? How do things actually work? And we've seen a lot of the underpinnings, in the last year of comics, but by no means have we seen anything or not anything, everything. We have seen things. By no means have we seen everything. And like, it doesn't sort of feel like you could just go and go and go and keep finding new little pockets of the worlds to explore, which again, as a fan and an editor, is incredibly exciting.
That's good. I know there's been a lot of people doing a lot of a lot of archaeology work trying to uncover all these new pockets, just the ones that have been revealed and trying to see, well, what could this mean? What could this mean? And then looking forward to some of the stuff that's coming. I know, the two books that were pre-pandemic, at least still like on the radar to we've got to come out, is X Factor, which was looking at the resurrection side of things and how all that works, which has been fascinating. And then, we've been promised it's coming at some point. We promise Children of the Atom that's looking at the, people who were inspired by X-Men in one way or another, that next generation sidekick kind of thing. So, I mean, to me, those are two ideas that haven't been done before, and it's interesting to see that, looking forward in the line and how that may play out.
It just feels like a set of, I mean, rules isn't exactly the right word, but like it's like a set up pretty much, and you just go, okay, well, what if we dropped in this character to this situation? How would they react? And you get all these really fascinating different pieces coming together, and you go, okay, well, if people have to come back to life, then somebody's going to have to figure out who goes first, right? And like you just get to like build all these scenarios, and yeah, like I said, I think that's what makes it fun and makes people say, oh, there's going to be a book about the X-Men sidekicks. Well, what's that? I want that. I want to know what that is, I
mean, look, there's a lot of people who do want to know what that is, and you guys are just putting us on the hook waiting for it, but I'm sure it'll be great when it finally does hit.
It will.
Now speaking of that, there's obviously a global pandemic going on that has completely shaken up everything. The comic book industry has been hit pretty hard with some of this stuff. Has that put any specific challenges on you as an editor, as someone who, normally lives for, this is the set time that I need my pages, that I need to get the book printed, that I need to get it shipped, all that stuff? How has the pandemic and the COVID stuff changed your day-to-day?
Yeah, I mean, part of the biggest one is that we're not physically in the office anymore, which has been pretty wild. But we've been in that situation for a while now. We're I think, pretty good at making comics when we're not in the same room anymore, which felt pretty impossible way back in March. In terms of like scheduling, it does change things and it doesn't. We kind of dealt with this a little bit early because we have a lot of Italian artists, and Italy was hit really hard by COVID earlier than America was. And so we had a lot of artists in like January and February coming to us and saying, hey, sorry, I'm really not getting as much done as normal, but like my city is like a war zone, basically. Like I can't go outside and it's really scary. And at that point, this was still like considerably more distant for many of us.
Right.
So we did get like a little bit of practice dealing with it in part. Then obviously when COVID hit bigger in the US, things kind of unravel a little bit in terms of like the actual physical production of books and, people being able to physically manufacture products.
Right.
And that has, that's a much, much bigger thing that I can probably get into or even speak confidently to. So there was a little bit of an interesting time in terms of, okay, what are we pushing against? But generally in comics, I think if you talk to anybody, their number one lament is like there's never enough time to do things, the way that we want to do them. Like, oh, it's deadlines, everything's got to get done super fast and just keep moving. So we actually were given a little bit of a gift of, of course, obviously not that anything about COVID is good in any sense, but
right.
Just the gift of a little bit of extra time on certain things, which was, not a bad thing. For the most part, though, especially now as, we are back to a really consistent production schedule, you have to be understanding that this is a really hard time for a lot of people. It is a pandemic on a scale that I don't think any of us have ever experienced or probably ever will again. But unfortunately, like, we are still living in a world where, when a book has to go to print, the book has to go to print. So, but I mean, in some ways, that's just like being an editor, is you have to figure out how to be a person and be the person asking somebody to work faster, particularly like draw your art faster, make your creative work on more of a corporate schedule is always a little bit of a rough ask. It's a little bit harder even during a pandemic, but that's the job. So you kind of just figure out ways to, again, communicate and be a person while doing your job.
No, I know. I think a lot of people can relate to having to figure out how to redo their job in a whole different sense and make everything work with this. One of the impacts of this that I know Jordan's spoken to is that the big event that we were supposed to be pretty deep into at this point, Ten of Swords, not only got pushed back till the fall, but got expanded, which is, for me, very exciting because I do like reading out these X-Men comics and I do like swords. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody. Uh, but I'm curious what considerations went into taking this story that was planned out and saying, hey, we're going to make this bigger. We're going to do more with this. What went into that kind of choice?
Yeah, so that I think was, I don't want to, get too deep into it because I was not necessarily like person number one in all those conversations, as you can imagine, as assistant editor. But I know that the impetus for it was we just want to do something that's going to be really great for readers after they've, had a break from comics or a break from as many comics. Just how do we tell a story that's going to be as cool and exciting and new and like really feel incredible and big for people who have stuck with us through this whole like really hard, scary, weird time. And what I'll also say is that the whole thing was not like completely nailed down. It's not like the whole risk of like revealing our timelines too much. Like the whole event was not, or not event, it's not an event, it's a crossover. The whole crossover
Very important
was
distinction.
not, it is. And, I promise that was nothing more than a slip of the tongue. It is a crossover. It was not like the entire thing was written or like even incredibly heavily like drafted at that point. It was still very much, when we started looking at expanding it, it was in a pretty like malleable stage. We knew kind of where we were going. We knew broadly what the plan was for it, but it wasn't a matter of we're going to take 10 pounds of sand and put it in a 20-pound bag and tell you it's 20 pounds of story. It was, we have 10 pounds of sand, and here we have another 10 pounds of sand that are equally as cool and good and great. Let's put it all in this 20-pound bag and like hope everybody's ready for a lot of sand. That's a really bad metaphor, but
No, I love it. It's very good. We got sand, we got swords, we got large crocodile boys. We've got everything that the X-Men fans really do want.
I know the X-Men have not had their fill of sand recently, but it's coming. No, but I mean, I think the point remains that we weren't trying to retrofit like, oh, like a mini story where we're just gonna like cross over a couple things into, oh shoot, we have to fill 20 something issues of book. Like there's probably more story than we can even tell in, I think it's 22 issues of crossover, and we're just really excited to get that to everybody and have everybody see how cool it is.
Look, I know people are excited, and I'm excited. So that's all I really care about. Sounds like it's going to be very good, very stabby, and just an enjoyable time for everybody.
Yeah, and there definitely is a crocodile, so that
Yeah, I know you can't get into spoilers, but was the crocodile there before the pandemic, or did you guys feel like you just really needed something to spice it up, and you said, let's get a very large crocodile?
um Crocodile was also not retrofitted. Crocodile is I mean, and saying crocodile may not be completely holistically explaining what the situation is with Pog, but the crocodile, for lack of a better term, is a important part of the story, just like everybody else.
It's kind of beautiful that as an editor, you did have to be like, well, okay, he's not really a crocodile, but we're going to go with it. That's a very nice distinction there. It's very
Yeah,
exciting.
there's a lot of talking about these comics where you're like, okay, well, I don't want to explain too much and ruin anything, but I also don't want to explain too little and sound like a complete lunatic raving and ranting about a crocodile who's very large that everybody's in love with. So
everyone did flip when we found out there was a crocodile, and I think with good reason. I'm curious, did y'all know that was going to pop off the way it did? That everyone was going to love the crocodile?
I think we knew that people would enjoy the crocodile. I think the extent to which people really latched onto the crocodile specifically was unexpected. I think, if I'm recalling correctly, there's an email from Pepe Larraz I have somewhere where he was like, didn't expect that was going to be like how much that the crocodile was going to get all of the love, but like, that's cool to see, I guess. And I was like, Pepe, I completely agree. We were not really prepared for the outpouring of crocodile adoration.
Who could be prepared for Pog or Pog? Now I know you are tied into that stuff, just seeing what the reaction has been. Has there been anything else like that you weren't expecting people to latch onto as much as they did and said, okay, whatever, I guess this is what it is now?
I'm sure there would be if I thought about it for a little longer. I mean, just in general, like the day that we announced the crossover title being Ten of Swords, and people were like, "Oh, swords?" And I mean, right now it feels very like, "Oh, well, of course it's Ten of Swords. We've been talking about it forever. It was supposed to already have started coming out by now." But I mean, before that came out, we were kind of sitting there hoping that people would be really into X-Men with swords. To the extent that you do anything big in comics, you're always, building something and just going, okay, well, I hope other people think this is as cool as we do. And when it felt like the entire X-Men internet was like, oh, it turns out we're very into swords, that was really quite gratifying.
I remember specifically, I got a press release about it on the floor of C2E2, and a couple of the people who write for the show or write for the website were there with me, and we all huddled around my phone right by a trash can and looked and said, "Sword, okay, yeah, we can dig that." Took a second. There was 1 second for us to decide, are we really going to be into swords now? And the answer was yes.
And we couldn't be happier to hear that. I will say I was not at C2E2. It felt like everyone on Earth was at C2E2.
There were a handful of people there. The last
a lot of
convention that will ever exist. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, especially with today's cancellation officially of New York this year, it feels that way. But
yeah,
like being back in New York, just kind of like refreshing. I was doing a lot of work, of course, but also refreshing Twitter to see, when the actual announcement hit. And the like 10 minutes after that announcement was really very funny to experience from, 1,000 miles away.
I had been told, and I will not reveal my source, that you had some image macros, or as the kids call them, memes ready for the swords announcement that you did unleash on everybody.
I feel like I know exactly who it was that told you that. And I think that's probably ascribing more preparation to me than is fair. I know that I definitely have a tendency to kind of, because I'm like a person on the internet, I like think about the things that I think about all day, sometimes in meme format, for sure.
Right, the way we're all cursed.
Exactly. But I rarely am sitting there like, building these things far in advance so that I'm, first to the ball, as it were. Like, I mean, that's not really my role as editor. Sometimes, though, like, my third eye is entirely too open and I'm just like stricken with the idea and I have to put something out there. So I'm never trying to be like the top of the X meme news cycle or anything. I think it's maybe a little inappropriate for my job, but sometimes there's just something there that needs to be said and I feel I'm the person to say it.
X meme news cycle is a very, very bad group of words that got put together that I unfortunately know exactly what you're talking about, and probably caused too much of that myself. But no, that's good. I'm thrilled. I know there's supposed to be a lot of exciting stuff coming soon, which will be great. So without getting into any territory that will show your guys' hands, is there anything you guys are really, really excited about coming up in like the next 6 months that you can just say, hey, you're going to want to look out for this?
Maybe not in so many words. I can tell you that I read a number one script for a new book yesterday, that I've spent the last like 36 hours or whatever, essentially just mentally returning to and freaking out because it's so awesome and it's going to be such a good book and I'm so incredibly excited about it. And I think that's within the next 6 months. So, I mean, there's at least one number one coming that is going to blow people away.
In there. You had to throw that in there. Now you're going to get people real hyped up asking where this book is, which will be good. Good for me in the X-Men news business. This is the content we need to keep our presses going.
And it's the content that's going to, I think, probably end up with Jordan saying, Annalise, why did you say that? But Here we are.
Listen, I'll send him a fruit basket or something. He'll be happy. It'll all work out. I'll send him like an REM box set or what have you.
I think he may already have all of those.
He might. He got real into REM apparently. But no, speaking of all of the internet gremlins that do exist, we did ask Twitter for a couple of questions, and they came out in force somehow, which is great. But people have a lot of questions for X-Men editors. I don't know if you ever realized that.
It's becoming increasingly clear to me.
Well, we've just got a handful of them for you here. The first one comes to us from at Strictly Worse, Chris Porg, who does ask, without getting into spoilers, how early in the docs process was Ten of Swords planned?
That's hard to say. Like planned, I kind of alluded to this previously. Like a planning process is really long. Like to go from we're going to do a crossover to, here's what it's going to be about to here's, what we want to come out of it. And then, all the way to, and then here are all the books, here's the order they're going in, and here are all the scripts. Like that probably may have been like a year or more of planning. So it's been a really long road.
That's fun to hear. This comes to us from Zack Raybroff, who does ask, which X-writer submits scripts with the consistently greatest number of typos and or worse font? You can choose which one of those you want to answer.
Nobody comes to mind, which is probably a good sign that everybody is pretty much equal. And that's also probably the kind of thing that I shouldn't answer to keep everybody happy. It's funny when you consistently read people's scripts, which I've been doing with different writers for like 5, almost 6 years at this point, because sometimes as an intern, you do get to see scripts, which is super cool. You really, really quickly learn what people's specific like things are in terms of like certain writers are just never going to spell this one word correctly, or a big one are that you learn whose scripts you should do find and replace. Like to versus and. There are specific like find and replaces that you learn to do for certain writers. Nobody's too egregious in terms of font choice. I'll say that. Sometimes also people like their brain just short circuits and they forget like how to spell a character name for an entire script. And that's always just fun to read because you're like, okay, well, you are writing this character and I want to remind you how to spell their name. But it's more important, honestly, that they remember like the characterization of that character or where they are, or one of the million other important parts about writing a comic, and we can fix the spelling in-house if we need to.
That's good. That's good. Next question comes to us from Jared Adams, who says, what does the X Office have in appearance/use of X-Men characters outside of, the official X-Men titles? So say when Wolverine shows up as a cameo in Black Cat, in a very good comic that if you guys didn't read, you should go check out. But something like that, especially with this new status quo with all these kind of new different rules for the X-Men.
Yeah, so generally at Marvel, the way it works is if you want to use a character that, quote unquote, belongs to a different office, regardless of how small that appearance is going to be, you ask about it. And then dependent on how small it is, sometimes it's just a matter of like, oh, they're going to be in the background of this panel or like a bit part. Like maybe you might just say like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. Broadly, because people want to make sure that everything makes sense across the line, they'll ask to read the script or to see the book once it's done and just give it a last once over. As an editor in a specific office, you have a much better sense of what works for your line than even another editor in another office, because everyone's going a million miles an hour all the time, so they may not understand like the exact nuance of how a Krakoan gate works. And if they, throw it into the back of a panel somewhere and have, something weird going on with it, you're going to catch that, 15 times over before an editor from another office. So usually you'll read it at the script stage. You sort of sign off on it in concept, you read it at the script stage, and then ideally, though not always, see the book before it actually goes to print with your character in it.
I think that's something that a lot of people have questions on how that works, so that's interesting.
I also want to say real quick, that's in an ideal world. That's not necessarily always how it works. So, like, you never want to throw anybody under any bus, whether it's yourself or another editor. Sometimes something just gets missed. Sometimes, all involved parties have a piece of old continuity in their head, or something's been established, on a side thing somewhere else, and you don't reflect it. And then understandably, fans are like, hey, what's going on? Is anybody, awake at the wheel over there? But we do try our best. I'll say that.
That's good. Nola Fowl asks, can you speak to the odds of Brian Braddock crying? It's very important to me that he cries. And they do add a note that this is not directly in relationship to Ten of Swords, just like in general. What are the odds that Brian Braddock is crying at any given moment?
At any given moment, I think it's like a 70-30, maybe. Okay. He's been seen semi-recently wandering around, in the rain, trying to figure out, what's going on with the sword and everything, and rain, tears.
At that Perry Mason or reboot there.
Right, exactly. Yeah, Brian is such a fun character. And I think he's one of those characters where it's just enjoyable for some reason to... I mean, this is every character, I guess. You enjoy watching them cry because you know that means somebody's doing something with them. Like, that's sort of the curse of the X-Men fan, I think, is there's so many amazing characters, and even when like your favorite or your favorites are being, tortured or something horrible's happening to them, you're like, well, at least they're on panel.
It's important that they exist. that
Yeah,
they've got
exactly.
something going on. I'm unfortunately cursed, staring at two pictures right now. One of Glob Herman, who constantly has things going on, which is great, and one of poor Maggot, who at least has shown up and is enjoying island life.
And sometimes that's all you can ask for. And I think we've done our best to, you know, get a couple of fan favorites here and there, make sure that, folks have at least seen what's going on or where their favorite character is on Krakoa.
Look, as long as my boy can enjoy a cold drink at the Green Lagoon, I'm going to be happy. We got just a couple more questions. Charlie Etheridge Nunn does ask, which sword is the best? Not in comics, just in general.
That is a good question. My instinct would be to answer with a comics sword, because I spend all my time thinking about comics.
Right, right.
And I'm really blanking on the existence of real swords. I'm certain they're out there. I'm certain there are famous ones that exist, but my brain is
Real
just filling
name
in.
swords do people like in general know? Because I honestly can't tell you any.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, unfortunately.
Any of the real
like,
ones I know are legends that have been adapted to comics and now like hang in Wolverine's bedroom or whatever.
sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm just overall a huge fan of Betsy Braddock as Captain Britain and everything going on with her in Excalibur. And I love like the sword that she makes psychically. I think it is so cool. And every time we get a page of her like fighting anybody, anytime we see that art come in inks, in colors, I'm just like, man, this is so cool. This looks great. So I that's my answer. But again, it is a comic sword because I can't think of
It's
any
not even
others.
a real sword is the thing. It's a made-up laser mind sword, which is an interesting choice. Is it the same sword every time, or is it a unique sword every time? These are the
Yeah,
quandaries that
who
I want
knows?
to know the answer from Ten of Swords, really.
I can't confirm or deny whether or not you're going to get an answer on that one.
That's fair. Danielle1312 asks, who would Emma Frost pick in Mortal Kombat?
In the game or in like actual like combat to the death?
They spelled combat with a K, so I can only assume it is the video game.
I have never played, so I'm not going to be a good person to answer this question.
I assumed that they knew more about you than I did and thought you were like a big Mortal Kombat fan. So that question just right into the toilet there.
Yeah, to the chagrin of everybody in comics, I don't play video games. I also don't know anything about wrestling, which makes me, again, woefully on the outside of all conversations in comics.
Listen, I can relate to that one. My friends have made it so that I have to have a working knowledge of what's happening in wrestling, even if I do not watch it. It's just osmosis at this point. But we have one question that's left, and it is something that I do know you know about. This comes from at Mojo's work. Who's your Stanley Cup pick?
So I actually have been a very bad hockey fan this season because my team, the Detroit Red Wings, are well, I don't know, I should say were like hot garbage, and have been out of Stanley Cup contention for a million years at this point. I don't know. I like the Flyers, but I don't know how much of that is just like residual gritty energy. So it's very possible. I really don't have much of a rooting interest, unfortunately. Like, as a Detroit fan, I don't want Chicago to win or whatever,
Sure.
but that's pretty much all I got. I'm just kind of watching with interest to make sure that nobody I care about, infects the entire bubble or whatever.
That's important. The correct answer, by the way, is the Columbus Blue Jackets, who
Oh,
currently
that can't be true.
they are currently in their intermission between periods of their third overtime against the Tampa Bay Lightning as we record this.
Jeez.
A game that
Yeah.
started at 4:00 this afternoon.
Somebody is going to need to give them all a huge nap and a Gatorade. But yeah, I mean, I can't support an Ohio team either. So unfortunately, Columbus is out.
See, as an Ohio boy, that's a hard one to That's a hard pill to swallow, but I can understand it.
Yeah, a lot of anti-Ohio sentiment on my side.
I'm gonna guess like if I put my hand up and pointed, you could it would kind of look like the state that you're from. Just throwing that out
Exactly.
there. Yeah,
Yep.
that makes sense. Whole lot of that making sense. Oh well, I guess I'll just have to enjoy the football wins that aren't going to happen. Hey, Michigan's not going to lose this year. That's nice. That's an upside.
Right. I get that. I also heard about the Big Ten cancellations, though I'm not a football fan, so that means little to nothing to me.
Thank God. For all the Michigan fans out there, this doesn't count. But that's all the questions we have for you. Annalise, thank you so much for being on. It was a great time. If people are excited about your whole brand of things, is there anywhere you want them to find you at, or would you rather no one ever find you? Because those are both valid options.
The way that I prefer people find me on the internet is exclusively via Twitter at Annalise Bissa. That's my only public-facing social media and all of that. So yeah, at Annalise Bissa. Occasionally I do get into the X meme game, but generally I mostly just hype up the books that I'm working on and the awesome creators that I work with, and occasionally tweet about internship openings when we have internships. So if you are trying to intern at Marvel Comics, I may be a good follow.
Quality follow there. Yeah, guys, go ahead and do that if that sounds up your alley. If it doesn't, then, I mean, we're always at Xavier Files, so you can go over there. XavierFiles.com has all the latest and greatest news and interviews and write-ups about the books that Annalise is editing, which I think they're great. I think the books are great. I think the write-ups are great, too, in a different sort of way. But we got all that going on over there. And I mean, I guess that's all for this week. Next week, we are going to be doing you a public service and talking all about the New Mutants and Demon Bear so that you do not have to risk your health to go to the movie theaters during a dang pandemic. So look forward to that. Annalise, one more time, thank you so much for being on. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me on.
And until then, guys, this has been Battle of the Atom. We hope you survived the experience.
Get